The storm battered the old mansion, thunder shaking its ancient bones. Rain hammered the windows, wind howling across the moor. The mansion, isolated and crumbling, stood as a monument to forgotten secrets. Shadows clung to every corner, the air thick with the scent of damp wood and memories. Inside, Mac wandered the dim halls, seeking solace in the mansion's eerie peace. He was a writer, drawn to the solitude and haunted beauty of decay. Each room whispered of the past, every step echoing on dusty floors. The storm outside was chaos, but within a strange, unsettling calm prevailed. Mac paused, feeling the weight of the house pressing in, as if it watched him in silence. Mac relished the mansion's silence, usually a comfort for his writing. Tonight, though, the silence felt oppressive, as if the storm had seeped into the walls. He paced the main hall, the grandfather clock's slow tick amplifying his unease. Shadows writhed on the staircase, flickering in the storm's light. The house felt alive, holding its breath, anticipation thick in the air. Mac tried to dismiss his fear, but a shiver betrayed him. It was just an old house, he told himself. Yet deep down, he sensed something had changed. Mac's eyes caught a small, antique bell by the main door, one he'd never seen before. Its tarnished metal was etched with strange engravings, oddly at home in the mansion's decay. Drawn by its presence, Mac reached out, his fingers tingling as they brushed the cold surface. The bell's deep clang shattered the silence, echoing through the house. The sound vibrated in Mac's bones, lingering long after it faded. The air grew colder, a chill settling over him. He tried to calm himself, just an old bell in an old house. But the shadows seemed to deepen, the silence now heavy and expectant. Mac stood frozen, heart pounding, as if the house itself was listening. Something had shifted, and he felt it in his core. Mac retreated to his study, but the sense of being watched clung to him. Every creak and sigh of the house set his nerves on edge. Even the warm glow of the lamps couldn't dispel the oppressive air. The silence was no longer peaceful, but tense, waiting. Staring out at the storm, Mac saw a figure at the edge of the property. Tall, motionless, it seemed carved from shadow, unmoved by the wind. He blinked, hoping it was a trick of the light, but the figure remained. Fear gripped him. He was not alone. Something had answered the bell's call. Mac backed away from the window, unable to look away from the distant figure. He wanted to run, but a strange compulsion held him in place. One question echoed in his mind: what had he awakened? The next day, sunlight did little to ease Mac's dread. The image of the figure haunted him, drawing him back to the bell. Against his better judgment, he rang it again. The sound was sharper, more powerful, vibrating through the house. At the tree line, the figure reappeared. Closer, unmistakable, watching him. It was taller than before, its gaze fixed on Mac. The connection between bell and figure was undeniable. Panic surged as Mac stumbled from the bell, the figure's presence pressing in. He fled to his study, desperate for escape, but realized he was trapped. No phone, no help. The bell and the thing it summoned had sealed him in. His only hope: avoid the hall, avoid the bell. But fear gnawed at him, knowing he couldn't hide forever. Hours blurred in terror as Mac paced, unable to rationalize what he'd seen. The bell's silence mocked him, every sound in the house a threat. He knew he couldn't stay hidden. He needed to see the figure again, to face the truth. It was madness, but he was compelled. He had to know, even if it destroyed him. Mac crept from the study, dread mounting as he neared the entrance hall. He forced himself to look out the window. The figure stood at the gate, closer, more defined, impossibly tall and skeletal, its hooded head turned toward him, gaze cold and malevolent. The bell seemed to hum, its power growing as the figure approached. This was no illusion. The nightmare was real, and it was coming. Panic drove Mac to act. He had to silence the bell. Grabbing a fireplace poker, he marched to the bell, heart pounding. He struck with all his strength, but the bell absorbed the blow. Unscathed, desperation mounting, he tried again, but the bell remained untouched. A cold dread washed over him. The bell was protected by something unseen. He realized the bell was the key, its power unbreakable. The figure outside drew ever closer. Fueled by terror, Mac attacked the bell again and again, but it would not break. He tried to rip it from the wall, hands burning from the cold metal. With a final desperate pull, the bell came free, sending him sprawling. The bell clattered to the floor, its silence now more terrifying than its sound. Mac scrambled away, heart racing. The nightmare far from over. The bell's presence was inescapable, and outside the figure waited, patient and relentless. He had to get out, to run, to escape this house and its horrors. Every instinct screamed at him to move, to break free from the grip of terror that threatened to consume him whole. The air itself felt thick, pressing in on him from all sides, as if the very walls of the mansion were alive and conspiring to keep him trapped within. But his legs felt like lead, rooted to the spot by a fear so profound it stole his breath. He tried to will himself forward, but his body refused to obey. Paralyzed by the overwhelming sense of dread that radiated from every shadowy corner. His eyes darted around the room, searching for an escape, a place to hide, but the mansion offered no sanctuary. Every doorway seemed to lead deeper into darkness. Every window was shrouded in grime and impossible to open. The sense of being watched grew stronger with every passing second. As his gaze swept across the hallway, he noticed something he hadn't before. A subtle shift in the darkness, a presence lurking just beyond the edge of his vision, waiting for him to notice. A flicker of movement at the top of the grand staircase. It was so slight, so fleeting, that he almost convinced himself he'd imagined it. Almost. It was there, the figure, no longer a distant silhouette, but a horrifying reality. The darkness seemed to cling to it, as if the shadows themselves were drawn to its presence. It stood at the top of the stairs, its form shrouded in shadows, yet undeniably present. The figure was motionless, but its very stillness was more terrifying than any sudden movement could have been. He couldn't make out its features, but he could sense its gaze, cold and predatory, fixed upon him. The weight of that unseen stare pressed down on him, making it hard to breathe, as if he were being hunted by something not entirely of this world. It hadn't moved, hadn't made a sound, but its presence was suffocating, a chilling premonition of an inevitable encounter. The silence between them was electric, charged with the promise of something unspeakable about to unfold. Fear, raw and primal, surged through him, urging him to flee. Every nerve in his body screamed for escape, for survival, for anything but this unbearable confrontation. He scrambled to his feet, his heart pounding against his ribs like a captive bird. His hands shook as he gripped the floorboards, desperate for any sense of stability in a world that suddenly felt unreal. The mansion, once a place of solitude, now felt like a tomb, its silence a suffocating blanket of dread. Every creak and groan of the old house seemed to echo his terror, reminding him that he was utterly, terrifyingly alone, except for the thing that watched from the shadows above. His eyes darted between the figure and the fallen bell. Every muscle in his body tensed and ready to spring. The air was thick with dread, and the silence pressed in on him from all sides, making every second feel like an eternity. His mind was a whirlwind of terror and desperate calculations, racing through every possible escape route, every memory of the mansion's twisting corridors and locked doors. Panic threatened to overwhelm him, but he forced himself to focus, clinging to the hope that there was still a way out. He had to get out, had to escape this nightmare before it swallowed him whole. The walls seemed to close in, shadows stretching and shifting with every flicker of his trembling flashlight. But the figure remained motionless, its silence more menacing than any growl or shriek. It watched him with an unblinking gaze, as if daring him to make a move to test the boundaries of his own fear. He backed away slowly, never taking his eyes off the top of the stairs. Every step a battle against the urge to turn and run blindly. Each step back felt like a victory, a desperate attempt to reclaim some semblance of control in the face of overwhelming fear. The floorboards creaked beneath his feet, echoing through the empty halls like a warning. The air grew heavy, the silence punctuated only by the frantic thumping of his own heart. Dust motes danced in the thin shafts of moonlight, swirling around him like restless spirits. He had to get out. Every instinct screamed at him to run, to find the door, to escape the suffocating grip of the mansion's darkness. He had to reach the front door, escape the suffocating confines of the mansion, and never look back. The thought of freedom was a distant glimmer, but it was enough to keep him moving. But as he took another step back, his foot struck something solid, sending a jolt of fear through his body. He looked down to see the bell lying there on the floor, seemingly innocuous, yet radiating an aura of dread. Its presence felt like a warning, a reminder that he was not alone. And then a sound, soft at first, then growing louder, cut through the silence. The creak of a door, the metallic scrape of a lock turning, each noise sent chills down his spine. It was the distinct click of the front door unlocking. Mac's blood ran cold. He was trapped, caught between the unknown terror above and the ominous promise of escape that now felt like a cruel trick. Trapped in a nightmare of his own making, with nowhere left to run and no one left to hear his cries for help. The click of the lock echoed through the hall like a death knell. Mac's breath caught in his throat, his eyes darting between the fallen bell and the shadowy figure that stood on the stairs. The figure hadn't moved, yet it felt closer now, its presence more imposing, more menacing. The air crackled with an unseen energy, a palpable tension that pressed down on him, stealing the air from his lungs. He was trapped, caught in a macabre dance with an entity he couldn't comprehend, his every instinct screaming at him to run, to hide, to escape. And then, as if guided by an unseen force, his hand reached out, not towards the front door, not towards any hope of escape, but towards the fallen bell. His fingers closed around its cold, metallic surface, the familiar weight both terrifying and strangely comforting. He knew it was futile, knew that each ring brought the figure closer, but he was powerless to resist. It was as if the bell itself was calling to him, its silence a deafening command. He rang the bell. The sound was deafening, a resonant clang that seemed to consume all other sound, all other thought. It reverberated through the mansion, bouncing off the walls, seeping into his very bones, a visceral manifestation of his terror. The figure on the stairs moved. It was a slow, deliberate movement, devoid of urgency, yet filled with an unnerving purpose. It descended the stairs, each step a heavy thud that sent shivers down Mac's spine. Mac stood frozen, the bell slipping from his grasp to land with a dull thud on the floor. His eyes, wide with terror, reflected the approaching figure, his breath caught in his throat, a silent scream trapped within his chest. Time seemed to distort, stretching out the agonizing seconds as the figure drew closer. The shadows around it deepened, swirling and shifting as if they were alive, extensions of the entity itself. It stopped directly behind him. Mac could feel its presence now, cold and oppressive, a suffocating aura of dread that enveloped him. He didn't dare breathe, didn't dare move, his entire being consumed by the terrifying reality that stood just inches away. He closed his eyes, unable to face the inevitable, the unknown horror that awaited him. The silence stretched on, punctuated only by the frantic beating of his own heart, each thump an agonizing reminder of his mortality. And then a sound. A soft sigh, close to his ear, sent a wave of goosebumps across his skin. It wasn't a breath, not a whisper, but something far more ancient, far more chilling. It was the sound of something evil, something hungry, something that had been waiting for him. The sound seemed to linger in the air, a promise of unimaginable terror to come. Mac's grip on consciousness wavered, his senses overloaded, his mind unable to process the sheer horror of his situation. The silence stretched on endlessly, each tick of the grandfather clock echoing through the empty halls like a hammer blow to Mac's sanity. The sound was relentless, a constant reminder of the passing time, and with every tick, the air seemed to grow heavier, more oppressive, as if the very walls were closing in around him. The presence behind him was immense, a suffocating wave of dread that threatened to crush him beneath its weight. It was as if the darkness itself had taken form, looming over him, pressing down on his shoulders, making it nearly impossible to breathe. He could feel its coldness seeping into him, stealing his warmth, his breath, his very life. The chill was unnatural, a deep, bone-aching cold that seemed to reach into his soul, draining him of hope and strength. Mac's hand twitched uncontrollably, his fingers instinctively balling into a fist as if that small act of defiance could protect him. But even that simple movement felt futile, a desperate gesture in the face of overwhelming terror. He wanted to fight, to scream, to do anything but stand there, paralyzed by fear. Every muscle in his body screamed for action, but he was rooted to the spot, unable to move or even cry out for help. But his body refused to obey, his mind trapped in a spiral of terror, his every instinct screaming at him to flee, yet knowing it was futile. The fear was absolute, a prison with invisible bars, locking him in place as the seconds dragged on. The unseen was always more terrifying than the seen. The mind conjured horrors far worse than any reality, and in that darkness, imagination became his greatest enemy. The anticipation, the dread, the agonizing wait for the inevitable, it chipped away at his resolve, leaving him a hollow shell of the man he once was. Every second stretched into eternity, and the silence was broken only by the pounding of his own heart. And then a sound. A low, guttural growl right behind him sent a fresh wave of terror through him. It was a sound that seemed to vibrate through the floor, rattling his bones and freezing his blood. It was a sound that defied description, a sound that spoke of unimaginable power, of ancient hunger, of a darkness that stretched back to the dawn of time. In that moment, Mac knew he was not alone, and whatever lurked in the shadows was far more terrifying than anything he could have imagined. The screen cuts to black. Silence. Then the faint metallic clang of the bell, closer now, echoing in the darkness. A beat, another clang, closer still. The screen flickers back to life, revealing the antique bell lying on the floor, its surface gleaming faintly in the darkness. A hand enters the frame, its skin pale and skeletal, its fingers long and bony. They reach for the bell, their touch, hesitant at first, then tightening, possessive. The hand slowly raises the bell, its every movement filled with an unnerving grace, a macabre dance of death. The screen fades to black once more, leaving the audience with a lingering sense of unease, a chilling reminder that some horrors never truly die. The bell's sound fades into the distance, leaving a silence more terrifying than any scream.